to some point. It can lower inhibitions. It can change our energy levels. It can change how we're able to do things. There's all sorts of ways where it can change. Then there's a bunch of examples there. And then that last sentence, it says many people have mental health concerns from time to time. So that means these things are episodic. It means it's not just people are like me where they have a chronic mental health issue that will follow them for the rest of their life. It means this can come in stints. I can have a depressive episode that passes, and I may never experience another one, ever. Or it can come back over and over again. Or it can be chronic. And a lot of the time we don't know what that's going to be until it is. Merriam-Webster's define mental illness this way. Mental illness is any broad range of medical conditions such as major depression, schizophrenia, obsessive-compulsive disorder, or panic disorder that are marked primarily by sufficient disorganization of personality, mind, or emotions to impair normal psychological functioning and cause marked distress or disability, and that are typically associated with disruption in normal thinking, feeling, mood, behavior, interpersonal interactions, or daily functioning. So they definitely win the award for using the most big words. Yeah, they've got the Mayo Clinic beat. That's hard to do. There's a lot of commonalities here, right? It's still a range of medical conditions. We've still got that going on. There's still a bunch listed, and they're marked primarily by sufficient disorganization, so there's some degree that they have to be off, right? A normal person who has a little bit of anxiety, that's not a marked change. So it has to be far enough off. And they impair your normal psychological, your personality, mind, emotions, and impair your psychological functioning and cause marked distress or disability. Then they affect your thinking, feeling, mood, behavior, interpersonal actions, or daily functioning. So they have to make a change in your daily life. This has to dictate how you spend your day because you're worried about how your anxiety or depression or bipolar disorder or panic disorder or addiction, how that's going to play out. It has to change that. I would add one thing to both of these definitions, and that one thing is that you cannot directly control how this thing happens, right? If a person has an anxiety disorder, and anxiety disorders are normally around 18 to 19% of the population, they change that stat every year, you can't say, I will be less anxious by thinking really hard about it, right? If you have an anxiety disorder and someone says, hey, just don't be anxious, and they quote Philippians 4:6 and say, don't be anxious, but by prayer and supplication, make your thanksgiving known to God. And they say, I've been trying that every day. I'm really good at trying that. It hasn't worked yet. I'm still trying really, really hard. And it's because they can't directly control that anxiety. They can't make that marked change in their own brain. They can work to try and work around that anxiety. They can build out coping mechanisms. They can work on identity issues. They can figure out what the roots of that problem are, triggers, all of that, all of those disciplined interactions. But I can't actually change the outcome. I can't actually be anxious and then think really hard, and I'm not anxious anymore. Same thing with depression. I can have depression and think really hard. I can't make it go away. There's something else that needs to happen. There's something bigger. So we have an idea of what mental health issues are at this point. How common are they? Steve already mentioned that about 19% of people have mental health issues this year. But that's only this year. And that doesn't include the friends, families, and loved ones that are affected by a mental illness, even if they're not personally the one who has one. So how many of you guys know at least 4 people? A few of you. Great. Great. I hate to tell you this, but if it's not them, it's you, most likely. Okay. Now that we've got that straight. Now, we also said these things were episodic. They pop up from time to time, which means that this year, the numbers are going to be lower than you have a lifelong prevalence. So that lifelong prevalence is actually 47%. So how many of you know at least one person? Great. If it's not you, it's them. Isn't that great news? Not really, but that's okay. The reality is these things hit a huge swath of us. And because we're not willing to talk about them, we don't often realize how common they are. And that's okay. Doing something like bringing me up to talk or talking about it personally, because Steve has talked about all of this stuff, that changes that perception. It allows us to open up where we know we're not alone. Now, mental illness. We're in a church, right? It's Sunday morning. Is mental illness in the Bible? I did a quick search this morning through the index and the table of contents. I didn't find mental illness in there. There's all sorts of examples of mental illness in the Bible, though. Normally, when we think of mental illness, the most drastic evidence of mental illness is suicide. There are 7 suicides in the Bible. These are them. It's not exactly like the Hall of Fame of biblical leadership. We've got Abimelech, we've got Samson. Samson's situation, he's going to die anyway, and he knocks a temple down on top of all his enemies. We've got Saul and his armor bearer, who are about to die, and then they take their own lives. We've got Ahithophel, who was a king, who killed himself. We have Zimri, who turned. He was king for a week. Good week, maybe. Then the army turned. They elected Omri. They sieged the city he was in, and he burned the palace down on top of himself. And then we all know Judas Iscariot betrayed Jesus, and then because of that racked regret, actually he took his own life. This isn't exactly the group of people that you think, mental illnesses are really common with really great people, which is why I keep 2 lists. Because there's a second list, and you can see it now, which is the list of people who, in the Bible, actually ask God to kill them. And it's actually the Hall of Fame list, right? In the Hebrew Bible, Moses is the central character. He is the central character in the central plot point of the whole book. The Exodus is the biggest thing. He's the man who's described as a friend of God, who's described as seeing God face to face, who is righteous in every way, and who also asks God to kill him. Job has his whole life fall apart. But he's also the most righteous and good man in the entire planet. Elijah's like the prophet of prophets who defeats Baal and then immediately asks God to kill him because he feels threatened by Jezebel. Jonah has kind of a patch story, right? But what we take away from Jonah a lot of the time is he's also the only guy who goes to the most hostile nation on the planet to go tell them about God. And he doesn't really do it willingly or well, but he does it. This is like the guy who reaches ISIS. And he's a guy who asks God to take his own life. And then finally, Jeremiah, who's this incredibly faithful prophet who's sitting at his own country's demise, asks God, please take me out of this. Now, I mention that because in the Bible, you're not going to get a lot of characters who have chronic mental illness from the time that they're young who are going to make the pages. It's just not going to happen. The Bible is kind of a who's who. It's leadership characters. There's not a whole lot of, this was the homeless guy on the street who had a mental illness that was chronic, but there was never any cure, and we didn't even know it was a mental illness. It's not going to make the pages. Someone like me is never going to make the pages. But when you see the kings and the most respected men in the entire known world at that point, and you can say these 5 actually asked God to kill them, that's a big deal. Because it means that even though they were successful, they were following God, they were doing all the right things, it did not save them for an experience of depression that was so dark they wanted to end it. Now we could talk a long time on just generalizations, but I want to focus in on one character and get some specifics on this point. And I want to focus in on King David, because he's the man after God's own heart. We really relate to King David a lot. He's like a huge portion of the Old Testament. And King David just talks so openly about what he's feeling and going through. It really creates a space where we can be open about our own thoughts and feelings. And he wrote a huge part of the Psalms, which is where we see a lot of that. So I want to throw this up. This is Psalm 30. In this psalm, a lot of the time people think that David's talking towards the end of his life about what it's going to be like building the temple and building his own house out of cedar in Jerusalem. But looking back, he says, "As for me, I said in my prosperity, I shall never be moved. But your favor, O Lord, you made me strong. You made my mountain stand strong. You hid your face, I was dismayed." And we see this two sides of David. When things were good, David's like, "This is the best. I am God's chosen king. I am the son of God. Like, I am doing awesome things. I will never be moved. I will always be faithful." And then something happens. And God hides his face. And David says, "I was dismayed." And it brings us to a really important point, which is we need to talk about this disappointment. Because David's feeling disappointment right now. He wants to be close to what God is doing. He wants to feel what God is doing. He wants to know God right now. And he doesn't feel close at all. He feels a mile away. When we started My Quiet Cave, we started a mentoring program. It failed miserably, but I learned a lot of great stuff out of it. One of the things we got to do as part of that program is we got to interview a lot of people with mental health issues. And they were all over the spectrum. We had people from homeless drug addicts to pastors to CEOs of multi-million-dollar organizations. And there was this common thread in every single person that we talked to. And that was that they believed that God was disappointed in them. And I think that's much more a human issue than it is a mental health issue. And it came up because we were asking a key question. We were asking that question again that I posed at the beginning. What does God expect from me? And there's a reality that we believe that God expects a lot from us, even if we don't voice it very often. I am a husband. So there's things that I believe as a husband I need to do. How do I honor my wife well? How do I be a good husband? I am a dad. How do I do that well? It comes with all sorts of responsibilities, right? I run a Christian organization. That comes with all sorts of other tethers with it. I'm also a homeowner. We own a house. We have a bunch of neighbors. How do I be a good neighbor? Jesus says in the Great Commission, go therefore and make disciples of all nations. I also need to go make disciples. I also need to do this thing and that thing and this thing and that thing. And before I know it, I'm not just asking the question, what does Christian life look like and what does it look like for me to experience Jesus? I've got this whole laundry list of stuff that I'm trying to do because this is what the good Christian life looks like. And it's not out of some really, really ugly sort of motivation that I'm doing that. I want to live a really good life. I want to be a great husband. I want to be a great dad. I do want to love my neighbors. I do want to be a great friend. I do want to be a great executive director of a Christian nonprofit. I do want to do all of those things. But when it falls apart and I'm dismayed, what then? If my obligations, require me to always be at 95% or better, what happens when I'm at 35? What happens when I can't show up to work every day and be great? What happens when I show up at my desk and I just sit there and that's a good day? What happens when I go home and I can't really be a great husband? I'm just kind of there. What happens when I really want to be a great dad? I really want to engage my son. And instead, there's just nothing there. What happens when I want to be a great neighbor or a great friend or all of these things, but I can't bring myself to do anything else? I am completely and utterly full. My life is full with just trying to take care of me. And it feels way, way overburdened just to do that. In that spot, that's the spot where every person that we talked to was. The homeless drug addicts, to the pastors, to the CEOs of the multi-million-dollar organizations, all of them are saying, my life requires me to be at 95%, and I can't do it. I'm at 35% right now on a great day. I don't know if my meds are going to work. I don't know if therapy is going to pan out. How do I do this? God, why are you so disappointed in me? And like I said, that's not a mental illness problem. That's a human problem. What do we expect from God? What does God expect from us? And the flip side of that, what do we expect that God expects from us? Right? Now I want to throw this up here. This is Psalm 69. David's running from his enemies, because David is always running from his enemies, it seems like, in the Old Testament. And David's crying out. He says, "Save me, O God, for the waters have come up to my neck. I sink in the deep mire where there is no foothold. I have come into deep waters, and the flood sweeps over me. I am weary with my crying out. My throat is parched. My eyes grow dim with waiting for my God." Like, that's the feeling. I'm in way over my head right now. God, where are you? Please show up. I can really use some help. And my eyes grew dim from waiting for my God. Like, I can't do this forever. David's just sitting there like a rock at the bottom of a river, right? And the water just keeps rolling over the top and just eroding it. And David's just waiting. He's like, I don't have a whole lot longer. I don't know how long I can stay here while I'm eroding away. So I have to ask the question, what's God's expectation of us? Because when I've asked what I think God expects from me, normally it's the laundry list. God expects so much from me. How do I be a great husband, a great spouse, a great executive director, a great Christian? How do I stay connected and abiding with God in the midst of a busy life? How do I do all of this? And I've really come to realize that God's expectation of me is a whole lot simpler than my expectation of me. If I could look at myself the way God looks at me, that would be pretty great. John says this in John 10:10. He's quoting Jesus. Says, "The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I came that they might have life and have it abundantly." I want to bring up this because when we're talking about mental illness, normally there's normal life. There's life with depression, which is like way down here. And the goal is to get back to normal. But there isn't this idea with mental health or with like Celebrate Recovery or anything like that, where no, God promises abundant life. And that promise isn't void because I'm going through depression or bipolar or anything else. He actually wants to do it. But it's true. And God's expectation is, no, I want you to experience abundant life, whatever that looks like. So I want to challenge you this morning. He came to give us life abundantly, but when I look at this rat race, my list, all of this stuff, it just doesn't measure up. It's just not there. There has to be another way. And I'd like to break down some of the barriers that get in the way, some of the things that cause us not to get there. The first thing I've already mentioned a number of times, it's expectations. What do I expect my life needs to look like in order for me to be good? Because I think God is not very interested in all of those expectations. Because as I'm trying to do all that, I'm kind of missing the point. When Jesus talks in John 15 about the vine and the branches and abiding, he says really clearly, I'm the vine, you are the branches, my Father's the vine dresser. If you abide in me, you will bear fruit, for apart from me, you can do nothing. I am really, really, really good at trying to produce fruit on my own. And this is how it goes. Ready? Nothing. We can try it over and over and over again. But it always ends up the same. The way that process goes is we abide with God, we sit connected to him, listening to him, and his words become a part of us. And in that process, while we're connected, fruit just is a natural outcome. Like apple trees don't try to produce apples. They try to absorb minerals and get sunlight, and they just happen to produce boatloads of apples. And the same is true in the kingdom of God. Like the abiding comes first, then the fruit. So the expectations are completely secondary. The abiding comes and the expectations happen, not the expectations happen and then I connect. The second thing I want to point out is the buzzword in mental health, which is stigma, which Steve's already addressed a little bit. Is it okay for me to talk about what's really going on with me with you? Is it okay for me to talk about what it's like to have bipolar disorder and feel scattered and feel broken and feel depressed? Is that okay? Is it okay to struggle with depression or anxiety? Is it okay to talk about schizophrenia? How about sex addiction? How about alcoholism? How about opioid addiction? How about some lighter issues that aren't lighter at all? Like infertility. Like anything that we happen to be struggling with, those are people issues. And as long as we're struggling alone, we can't actually enjoy God's abundant life, because God's abundant life is not something we get to do alone. It's a communal thing. And as long as we're locked away with our own stuff, believing that I need to get better so that I can engage, we just sit and rot there. We never get better. So, find open places where you can talk about that. That's what My Quiet Cave is. That's what Celebrate Recovery is. For a lot of you, there's a lot of places that you have in your life that are that place where you can just be fully you and be present and know that you're loved and you're good. Paul touches on this in Romans, just really, really in a small way. In Romans 15:13. It says, may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit you may abound in hope. This hope thing is something that God does. He's really, really in the business of it. He really likes hope. That there's a better tomorrow than there is today. That these things don't define us. And more than these things don't defining us, because that just gets us back to the baseline. That God actually wants abundance for us. That He wants us to experience what it is to be beloved sons and daughters of God to the fullest. He wants us to know our own value and worth. He wants us to experience what it is to be completely free of all of those chains that we've put on ourselves. And whether that's mental illness or anything else, that's God's desire for all of us. And that's a really beautiful thing. So I want to get back to the question, what does God want from us? Because I have my laundry list, and I've had my laundry list for a long time. And sometimes I get carried away with my laundry list because I think, oh, am I being the best executive director? Am I making all the moves that I needed to make? Am I making all of the things need to happen that need to happen? Am I caring for every person that comes to My Quiet Cave well? Am I trying to serve our church partners well? Am I trying to do everything that I can well? And then I come home, and Eugenia's had a really hard day, and I'm saying, oh, okay, well, I can take care of Bennett. I can hang out with him, and we can do whatever we need to do, and I can be present, and I can change diapers, and I can clean up all the stuff that happened earlier today, and then I can make dinner, and then I can do the dishes, and I can try to also hang out with my neighbors and my friends, and I can do all of these things, and in the middle of it, God is just saying, shh, stop. Stop. I love you, and you are my beloved son before you do a thing. So just stop, and know that you already have all that value and worth. And know that just being present with that is probably the best blessing that you can be to the people around you. Just being. So what is God's expectation for us? I think much more than expectations, God actually has desires for us. And I think those desires are things like, I really liked that, by the way. That was great. Those desires are things like, I want you to abide with me because I'm your dad and I just want to spend time with you. And I want the best life in the world for you. And it happens that best life happens when you're attached to me. I think God has desires where He wants to see His kids run around and be great. Like, I love nothing more than sitting in the backyard and watching my son dig in the mud because he's free. And it's like how he's wired to do life. And God wants that for all of us. He wants us to see us thrive in the way that we do life well. He wants to see us enjoy that. He wants us to be free from all the things that bind us and just enjoy who He is and our relationships and our life. And when it comes to mental illness or anything like that, I think God sits with us and says, I'll be with you. I know this is hard. I know this is a really, really hard season. My desires for you do not change. I still want you to experience life. I still hope you will experience life like this. I am with you in the trench. I will stay here with you. I'm not going anywhere. And you will have life. And it will be with me, and it will be good. Thank you.
I want to thank Brandon for joining us today and really appreciate the words that you brought. What next steps should we take from here? We've come in, we've heard this message. Now what? Where do we go from here? There are a number of different things that we can do. I'd encourage you to look at the next steps in your bulletin, in your program that you got. I would encourage you to go to the website for the National Institute of Mental Health, and the website's there in your bulletin, and educate yourself and learn more about mental disorder and what that might entail. I'd encourage you to go to My Quiet Cave's website, which is also listed there, and find out more about My Quiet Cave. I'd encourage you to sign up for an Overcome group. And by the way, there's also a special version of this for MOPS that's available as well. And there's also a new version of this, that's coming out at the end of the year that's designed specifically for veterans as well. And all of this is Christ-centered and biblically focused in what we're doing. Something else I would encourage you to do as a next step is pray. You know, I'm a big believer that a lot of abiding in the Lord comes down to prayer and spending that time talking to Him and just resting in Him and interacting with Him in that way. If you'd like some more suggestions, if you need help or assistance with anything, or if you're here this morning and you are ready to give your life to Jesus Christ so that you can have that abundant life, but because also you just recognize Jesus is who He is, and you want to submit your life to His control, then we'd encourage you to do that, to make that decision this morning. In just a few minutes, our elders and their wives are going to be back here in the back of the auditorium, and we're going to sing some more songs. And while we're singing, you're welcome to go back there, and they'll pray with you or try to address your needs in whatever way they can. But I thank you for being here this morning. May God bless you.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Steve. It's a good morning to be here. At this time, we've got some folks coming to the center aisles, or the mini aisles, to pick up the connection cards. If you filled one out, you can pass those to those aisles at this time, and someone will be by to pick those up. Thank you to those of you that took a moment to fill that out. And also just want to invite you to visit the back of the auditorium and spend some time with an elder spouse. A lot of important truths rattling around in hearts in here today from those words. And this morning we tried to sing some songs that affirm our goodness, that also give ourselves permission to lay down our burdens, right? And this song, I love this song, but the juxtaposition of the verse and the chorus are so extreme, because we sing about how good God is to us, and then in the verse, it's like we're in the pit, you know? So I want to invite you, if you're in the pit, sing from the pit, and that's okay. But I want to invite everybody as we sing those words, I cry out for your hand of mercy to heal me, to just be gentle with yourself and explore what that might mean and what God might have to say to you through that. So let's sing a couple songs. We have one song at the end that I wasn't sure we were going to have time for, so we didn't rehearse it, but I think we should probably sing it, so we'll see how it goes. So if you feel like standing, if you want to sit, if you want to hold the hand of a neighbor, do what you got to do. Go visit one of the elders and their spouses in the back. They're there for you. Here we go. For you are good, for you are good, for you are good to me. For you are good, for you are good, for you are good to me. I cry out for your hand of mercy to heal me. I am weak and I need your love to free me. Oh Lord, my rock, my strength in weakness, come rescue me. Oh Lord, you are my hope, your promise never fails me, and my desire is to follow you forever. For you are good, for you are good, for you are good to me. For you are good, for you are good, for you are good to me. I cry out for your hand of mercy to light of the world, you stepped down into darkness. Open my eyes, let me see beauty that made this heart adore you. Hope of a life spent with you. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. King of all days, also highly exalted, glorious in heaven above. Humbly you came to the earth you created, all for our sake became poor. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. Here I am to worship, here I am to bow down, here I am to say that you're my God. You're altogether lovely, altogether worthy, altogether wonderful to me. Beauty that made this heart adore you. Hope of a life spent with you. Here I am to worship. Oh, I was made for this, to know your tender kiss, to know a love divine, to know that love is mine. and I was made to laugh, and I was made to sing. Having the gift of life, you gave me everything. Can you smile while you celebrate? Let's try it. So I will celebrate and drink your cup of joy. I will give thanks each day and sing. My joy is found in you, and you are all my joy. Oh, I was made for this. I was made to love you, Jesus. I was made for this. Oh, I was made to love you, Jesus. I was made for this. Let's see if we can pick it up. My feet were made to dance, my spirit made to soar. My life is not by chance, you give me more and more. For I was made for you, and I have made my choice. And all that stole my joy, I left it at the cross. So I will celebrate and drink your cup of joy. I will give thanks each day and sing. My joy is found in you, and you are all my joy. Oh, I was made for this. I was made to love you, Jesus. I was made for this. Oh, I was made to love you, Jesus. I was made for this. When I was far away, you ran to welcome me. I left your warm embrace. I saw your smiling face. And when you rescued me, I saw my destiny to worship you, my Lord,
to be a
friend of God. So I will celebrate and drink your cup of joy. I will give thanks each day and
sing. My
joy is found in you, and you are all my joy.
Oh, I was made
For this. You claps, all right? Go for it.
I was made to love you, Jesus. I was made for this.
Oh, I was made to
Love you, Jesus. I was
made
for this.
so I will celebrate. Have a great week, everybody. Huh.